Hey, this is Meridith Elliott Powell, and it is 1 o'clock Eastern Monday. Time for Thrive, turning uncertainty into competitive advantage. The show where we dive into the strategies, discuss the steps, everything that you need to know to start to control change rather than have change control you. Now, here I am today with the myth, the man, the legend, Andy Paul. How you doing today, Andy?
I'm doing much better after that introduction. Thank you.
Well, I'm really excited to be talking to you about sales. You have one of the most interesting outlooks and perspectives and some great ideas that really work in today's sales market. So I'm going to hit the video and we'll go ahead and dive in. All right. Again, welcome to Thrive, turning uncertainty to competitive advantage. I want to welcome to the show Andy Paul. And Andy, for the couple of people out there, one or two that may not know you, give us a little bit of background on you.
Well, gosh, yeah, thank you, Meredith, for having me on the show. Real honor. I've been in sales my entire career. First 25 years working with a bunch of startup companies, last 20 years as a consultant, helping those same startup companies, or some more startup companies, grow. And gosh, about 6 years ago, started a podcast, and that's now up to about 1,030 episodes, and published a few books along the way, including one that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, it's your newest book, Sell Without Selling Out, A Guide to Success on Your Own Terms. Now, I've got to say, one of the very first things that caught me is that Jill Conrad said that you have written the new How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I thought it was really a great description, because I would have to agree. And I've got to tell you that Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People has probably been one of the most recommended books I've ever recommended to people.
Oh, me too. Absolutely.
Give us a little bit of history about this, because it's a guide to success on your own terms. Where did you come up with it? Why write it? What was the inspiration for it?
Well, I think the inspiration was really just everything that's going on around us, right? Is in sales, we just have this sort of steady drumbeat of survey findings showing that, hey, buyers find no value dealing with sellers. 80% of C-level execs had no value dealing with sellers. Gartner survey saying buyers would prefer to do the whole buying thing on their own if they could. And then we look on the selling side as, less than 50% of sellers are hitting quota. And you say, okay, well, all this stuff is going on. What's happening? And the bottom line for me was the buyers are basically saying, look, we're not getting enough from the experience of working with you, the seller, to either enable us or inspire us to make a decision. And for me, the root cause of that is that, by and large, we still are training and socializing sellers to act in ways that I call salesy, or selling out in the book, that just lend no value to the buyer, right? These are stereotypical, pushy, persuasive type behaviors that aren't about helping the buyer get and achieve what's most important to them, but they're all about how to get in order.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think it's ironic. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And I got a lot of it from reading the book, is that technically this is a time when we can pretty much buy anything we want to without ever interacting with a salesperson. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I think salespeople are more essential than they've ever been. We truly can bring so much value to the sale.
Can is the operative word, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think, the potential is certainly there. I like to say is that it's not that buyers don't want to deal with sellers, because in my decades in sales, buyers never want to talk to me, as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
But they do if you can help them achieve something that's important to them.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll make time for you if you can do that. Mm-hmm. And that's been the missing link is as sellers, we sort of train sellers to think that their job is to go out and persuade somebody to buy their product. And I think that's just the complete wrong mindset to have. I think your job as a seller is to listen to the buyer, to understand what are the most important things for them in terms of the challenges they're trying to solve and the outcomes they're trying to achieve, and then help them get that. And so if your perspective is more about that, helping them get what's important to them, then you'll act differently with them. You'll undertake a different set of actions that are more collaborative. And so we have all these words we use in sales that, words matter. I know you're,
Yeah.
top rated speaker. You understand words matter. Is, selling is not something we do to the buyer. It's something we
Right.
do with the buyer, right?
Such an important distinction. Where do you feel like sales got derailed? Do you think that do you think it has always been a less than respected position, or always thought of with a bad taste in its mouth, or do you think it got derailed somewhere along the way?
No, I don't. I don't think it's changed substantially over the years. I think that, the stereotypes that exist of sellers exist for a reason. I
Hmm.
mean, it's unfair. They're unfair. Undoubtedly, they're unfair. But again, they exist for a reason. And I think that we've amplified some of the bad behaviors through the way that we use technology these days to
Hmm.
reach out to buyers and so on. It's easy for the seller who had tendency to be a little more lazy in the first place and try to take a shortcut to, hey, I can go blast out 50 emails, 100 emails today to people, lightly personalized, if at all. And so we see more of that going on.
Yeah.
But I think beyond that, though, I think it's largely the same. I think, sellers are just approaching the job with the wrong mindset about what their job is.
Well, I was curious, were you writing this book? Had you started it before COVID happened, or
Yes.
was it something that kind of came to you in the middle of?
Well, that's a great point that you bring up, because I was just writing an email about this. Yeah, it started before COVID,
Okay.
and then sort of set it aside because there's so much sort of confusion and craziness going on. But Winston Churchill said, never let a good crisis go to waste.
Right.
And unfortunately, I think we've done that in sales. I think we had the opportunity, given such significant disruptions in the way we conduct our business. We had the opportunity to reinvent selling.
Hmm.
We had the opportunity to say, look, there's got to be a better way we can work with our buyers to enable them to make their decisions.
Hmm.
Instead, I think we sort of doubled down
I,
on what
I,
we did
I,
before.
yeah, I would agree with that. I think one of two things happened. I think we doubled down on what we did before, or salespeople pulled away. And I really felt like this was a time when my customers needed me more
Mhm.
than they ever needed me before. But I kept hearing from people, well, I don't really want to bother people. They've got a lot on their,
On their
they've got a
plate.
lot on their
Sure.
plate. Right.
But I think
Right.
that I think the sort of exemplification of what the opportunity was and what wasn't sort of taken was, within the first few months of the pandemic, there was this rash of articles written about, you need to lead with empathy.
Hmm.
It's like, well, yeah, that's not new. You've
Right.
you've always had to lead with empathy when you're dealing with your buyers. But it's like this, this moment of revelation came, right?
Hmm.
We could have extended it much further. We could have gone much further, but instead we're sort of back to where we were. And I think there's this sort of attitude among many sellers that, well, these things we do, the buyers find sort of cringe inducing. They're not as cringe inducing if we do them virtually as opposed to doing them
Right.
personally. and and I think it's really the opposite is true. And I
Hmm.
think that we underestimate sort of the distance that still exists between us and a buyer when we're talking even like this, right? I mean, you and I would not be having the same conversation if we were in person. It'd probably be even livelier and have, more fun if possible. But so it's true with the buyer. So I think we really missed an opportunity. So that helped me to sort of refocus and focus more narrowly on what I was writing about in the book and really sort of pinpoint these issues I bring out.
So one of the chapters that I really loved was chapter 9 on connection,
Mhm.
and I wanted you to talk just a little bit about, because I just thought you took some interesting perspectives in it. But just talk about connection as it relates to sales today, both in the COVID world, but also just in about doing the right thing with customers, and why connection. What back up to really, because I think
Mm,
you did a good job with this. What it really means to be connected
sure.
to somebody, and why that matters in the sales process.
Yeah. Well, I think at the end of the day, and there's been studies that have validated this, is that the majority of a buyer's decision is based on the interaction with you as an individual seller. And so if that's the case, is the ability then to form a connection with another human being, a trust-based connection with another human being, so that I say, in the book, I talk about, the real value of the trust is that the buyer opens the door to your influence. They open the door to letting you stick your nose into their business.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really essential. And so I try to draw in the book is this contrast with sort of these salesy behaviors that we talked about before, the selling out, which are a series of learned behaviors, right? We don't come out of the womb being pushy and persuasive. That's something that we learn how to do, but we do come out wired to connect with other human beings. Where this is, us as humans, as the tribal animals that we are. This sense of connection is really important, and this ability to build trust so that people let us in. That's really the gateway to beginning to understand what's really important to them and how we can help them. And if we don't have that connection, and part of the reason I bring this up in the book is there's been this sort of pushback of sorts from certain quarters in the sales world in the last couple of years about relationships with buyers.
Yeah.
Yuck, we don't need those. You don't need a relationship with your buyer. And unfortunately, people sort of just conflate relationship with friendship. And if you look at the definition of a relationship, it's the way in which two or more things are connected, right? So I sort of leaned into the word connected in that regard, is say, look, we are connected by virtue of me talking to a prospect. We're connected.
Mm-hmm.
It's how deep is that connection really dictates how far we're going to get with them.
Yeah, I think it's what I really love about it, and I think it's so often missed, is without connection, you can sell one time. With connection, you will sell multiple times.
Yeah.
And it's that piece. Well, do they, because if they trust you, you just took that to a whole nother level.
Exactly. The thing with everything that we in the business world and world in general, there are these rules, and the rules almost never apply 100% of the time, right?
Right.
I mean, I wrote something a year or so ago on LinkedIn about, if the buyer says, I just don't trust Meridith, but I'm going to buy from her anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that almost never happens.
Right.
Doesn't mean it can't happen, but the probability of it happening is very low. And that's really what we're dealing with in sales, right? We're trying to create scenarios where the probability of us being selected by the buyer goes up.
Mm-hmm.
And so these behaviors, to be able to connect with someone, to demonstrate your credibility, to build some level of trust. And I talk about in the book a little acronym about building trust, really essential.
Mm-hmm. Will you share the acronym?
Oh, sure. So the acronym is MICE, M-I-C-E, the 4 essential elements of building trust. And the M stands for your motivations have to be transparent to the buyer.
Mm-hmm.
So perfect example in sales where we do this badly all the time is salesperson will go out and tell the customer, convince the customer that, I'm here to help you. And the customer thinks they're being sincere in that. But then they get to the last week of the month and the manager wants to get that order pulled in.
Yeah.
And they tell the seller, go offer them 20% off. Well, they're not ready to make their decision yet. Make it 30. They'll make that. It's like suddenly you've told the buyer that you're just there to be transactional.
Right.
And they get it. Doesn't mean you won't get the order, but they'll churn quickly, right? You're not building that long-term connection. So got to be above board with your motivations. I stands for integrity, that if you are there to help the buyer, then your actions have to align with your words. It's a very simple definition of integrity. C is having credibility, and the E is about execution. Is throughout a selling process, we have multiple opportunities to live up to commitments we make, and we just need to do that. If we said we're going to get an answer back by a certain time, we get an answer back by a certain time. If we said we're going to respond by something by a certain time, we do that. Just simple things, and if you do that, then you're going to build the trust that you need with the buyer.
See, I'm curious if you feel the same way that I do. I think trust is more important than it's ever been. I mean, the moment that something becomes void in our society, and connection and trust are something that we're losing in our society. And the moment that the moment that something starts to seep away, to me, that's where the opportunity is, right? I mean, you talk about wanting to differentiate yourself in a marketplace. If you're somebody that can be trusted, if you're somebody that I feel connected to, all of a sudden it feels different. And sales is emotional.
Yeah. Well, I think that that to the point you're making is like, cite this author in the book, Jeffrey Colvin, who wrote this book, Humans Are Underrated, which is a great book. I recommend people read. But he's talking about the future of work and the role of humans in the future of work. And what he's saying is that, yeah, there are certain things machines can do well, but there's certain things that are innately human skills that machines are really never going to be able to do to the same degree. Is we need to get better at those, right? If we want to adapt to a rapidly changing world that we're living in that's driven by all these digital technologies, what's our uniquely human role in that? We need to lean into these human attributes. And that's really what I spell out in the book, is the 4 pillars of selling in. Is these are innate human behaviors: connection, curiosity, understanding, generosity. We're wired to do all of those things.
Well, and I feel like machines is such a great segue to understanding, because I loved that chapter. I love that chapter too. It's not that the others I didn't, but I feel like when I work with salespeople, this piece of slowing the sales process down long enough to connect, and then taking the time to understand. And when you speak about machines, I can certainly order on Amazon all day long. I can get on a chat and order what I want, but neither of those things can understand me, And so talk a little bit about understanding as it relates to sell without selling out.
Yeah, what it started with is that you see this so often in sales. I'm sure you see it with the clients you work with, is that sellers have playbooks, and the playbooks, they've got lists of questions they typically ask, or they develop their own list of questions that they typically ask. And it's really becomes more like survey taking at that point, right? I'm just going to gather this little bit of information about you. Okay, but what do you really understand about the buyer at that point? You know this information, but you don't understand the context. You understand why it's important to them and what they're trying to achieve. So as I talk about in the book, there's this huge gap between knowing something and understanding it. And our job as a seller is to help the buyer and ourselves cross that gap between knowing something and understanding it. Because unless we understand it, how do we know how to help them?
Right? Yeah. And so often I think, the reason that I love it, and I really want to talk about it, is we assume that customers understand what they need. And more often than not, it is not our customers' job to know our products and services and how they can help them. Their job is to know the problems they have. And sometimes they don't even intimately understand the level of the problems they have.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're doing there.
Sure. And that's, if you lose sight of that, again, if you think your job is just to go out and persuade somebody to buy your product, you're selling before you understand.
Right.
And that rarely ends well, right? Yeah. Unless it's very transactional, that rarely ends well. Yeah. So one of the things I don't have this in the book, but I having some of the materials will be coming out here shortly, is think about buying. We really need to reconceptualize how we think about the buying process. And so the buying really occurs in 3 steps. I call it the how, the what, the how, and the who. The what, the how, and the who. And so the first phase is the what. To your point exactly. What's the problem we're trying to solve? And what are the outcomes we can achieve by solving them? The second phase is, okay, we sort of got that. You as a seller hopefully have helped me understand that. What? Now the how is, we're going to go out and say, okay, how can we accomplish what we defined in the what? How can we meet the challenges and achieve our desired outcomes? At that point, it's still not very product oriented, right? The what stage is purely not about products. The second stage is more about products, but not about specific products. About what are the options that are out there to help us achieve what we want to achieve. The third order decision is who we do it with. And if you're a seller approaching things that way, you understand, what I really want to do is I really want to help the buyer get to that point in the how stage the fastest, that's related to the solution that we're offering. If we can connect the how to the what, then we have an advantage.
A big advantage.
A big advantage. But you just have to simplify it, right? It's, the multi-stage linear sales-based or linear stage-based sales processes that, in every CRM system in the world, and that have been around for 50, 60, 70 years. That's not how the buyer buys.
Yeah.
So why are you continuing to track your sales efforts based on stages that have no alignment with how the buyer is going through their process?
That is so key and such a missed part of the sales process is how are they going through the process and
Right.
what's important to them. It's interesting. I was on with a client a couple of days ago, and we were talking about the sales team, and it's a fairly new and young sales team, and they need a lot of training. And they really, really, the CEO is so heck bent on product knowledge.
Right.
And I said, take a breath. And I said, I want to focus on helping the sales team be so curious about the customer first. I said, because right now I could come sell for you. I don't know that much about your company at all. But if I ask enough questions and I take enough notes and I've done enough research, I can come back to you, Andy, and say, here's everything I learned. Now tell me how to help the customer. That we spend so much time understanding our own company and very little focused on understanding the customer.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But to your point, which is, I think is really the key point is, I think back to my first days selling in my career. I was 21. As I like to say, I look 16. I was out selling to CEOs, entrepreneurs focused on the construction industry, selling computers to the construction industry. I knew nothing about it, right? But I was very curious, and that's sort of just one of my personal traits. Very curious, and as long as I was asking great questions, as long as I was sincerely interested in understanding what was happening with them and how we might possibly be able to help them, they would spend as much time as possible with me. I never had somebody say, "Get out of here, asking too many questions." Right? And so that's how I made my way as a young salesperson who knew nothing about business, knew nothing about the construction industry that I was selling to, nothing. Because I'd ask questions and I was sincerely interested. I wasn't just reading down a sheet, with a list of questions on it.
Yeah.
I was in the moment. And if I didn't understand something, I'd ask a follow-up question. Could you explain that to me? Could you help me understand this? You don't need to know everything if you're willing to ask the right questions.
You don't. And I think one of the most important points you're making is sincerely curious. I do want to get to, just because I never see it mentioned in sales books. And I love that you talked about it, but it was the chapter on generosity. I mean, not I don't know if I'm embarrassed about this or what, but just not a term that we affiliate that much with sales. So being one who is curious, I love that. I think it's so true and so important. But talk a little bit about generosity and your perspective and the role that it needs to play in sales.
Well, again, you sort of break it down. I break it down. One point in the book is, you're listening, which is a generous act. You're listening to understand what's most important to them. That's a generous act. And then you're there to help them get what's most important to them. That's also a generous act. So generosity is really at the core of your job as a seller. But people, including some big name analysts in the sales world, think, oh, giving, you don't want to be a giver, right? If you're a giver, that means you just go in there and chat, talk. And I encourage people to read Adam Grant's book called Give and Take, which is a fantastic book. And he talks about these sort of personality archetypes, which is givers, matchers, and takers. Matchers being an equal mix of taking and giving. But he cites a study in that book that says, well, hey, if you stack rank people by personality type in terms of their productivity, the least productive generally are the givers. And then next up are the matchers. And then, the takers, next up are the matchers. And at the very top, though, are givers again. And he talks about there's a way of giving that is sort of lines with the acronym about MICE, about your motivations being very transparent, which is a giver with an agenda, right? You can give with the with the mindset of helping the buyer, knowing that if you can help the buyer achieve what's important to them, you achieve what's important to you as well. And so that mindset is, and Zig Ziglar talked about this, right? If you help enough other people get what's important to them in life, you'll get what's important to you, right? It's that's paraphrasing it, but that's so exactly true. And it's been my experience, and I know the experience of many others, is that if I'm here and I can help you, if I can give value to you to enable you to achieve what's most important to you, sure, I benefit as well, but I'm gonna be upfront about that. And this idea of sort of unrestrained giving, yes, there are lots of sellers that default to that because they aren't curious and all they know is some facts and figures about their products, and they're just throwing a bunch of stuff on the wall to see what sticks. And that's not effective giving. And that's not giving with a plan. That's not giving with a way to say, okay, because in the book, what I talk about is, how do you define value from a buyer's perspective? Because there's all this talk in sales about we're giving value, delivering value, so on. And I think it's very simple. And I talk about in the book is value is defined by the buyer, and to the buyer's mind, value means progress. Meaning as a result,
that's a great definition.
As a result of me interacting with you, if I'm the buyer, as a result of me interacting with you, Meredith, as a seller, if I end the meeting having made progress toward making a decision, then that had value for me. If the interaction had no value and I wasn't able to make progress, then that was a waste of my time. And so as sellers, we have to be very intentional about saying, look, every time I interact with a buyer, there has to be something I give them that enables them to make progress toward making a decision. Because if I have too many of these moments where I consume some of their time and give them nothing in return, then I stop getting time.
Absolutely. I always tell my clients to say that you need to understand that a sales call is a privilege. That people are giving you something that is very precious to them. And that is their time. Back in my day, we used to have people who we would do things called howdy doody calls. And, you had your leader pressuring you that you had to do X amount of calls a week. And so I'd just go call on you, Andy, 6 times because that way I could get my numbers in.
But put it on your Miller Hyman sheet.
Yeah, exactly. Put it on my little Miller Hyman sheet. But it isn't about volume. It's about quality, and it's about making sure that it's, truly, as you said, making progress. Because if you are not making progress, exactly as you say, you will stop getting time. It is hard to believe, but we are about at the end of the show. I always close with 2 questions, and you can answer them in any order you want to.
All right.
Number 1 is, of course, how do we find out more information about you? How does everybody get a copy of Sell Without Selling Out, which I cannot recommend enough. We're going to put everything about it in the show notes. Not only is it a great read, it is, you really need to experience Andy's writing style. If you've not experienced it before, it's easy and fun and amusing to read. It's also not a master huge book. No. I mean, Andy's great about that. He understands salespeople are not going to read something that is huge, that is long and involved. So how do they get a hold of that? The other is your biggest piece of advice of anybody out there looking to sell, grow a business in an uncertain marketplace.
Okay. So first, to get a copy of the book, obviously Amazon, wherever you buy books, either online or physically, it's going to be there. So effective tomorrow. We're recording this, on the 22nd. Yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn. Sort of all over the place there. If you want to send me an email, Andy@andypaul.com is the best way to reach me. Come to my website, andypaul.com, and we've got, you can download a free chapter of the book, and we've got a fun assessment, 10-question assessment you can take to see where you sit on the spectrum between selling out and selling in.
Oh, I love that. I didn't realize you've got that. I'm gonna I am definitely, I have not been up on the website. I am going to go to andypaul.com. Everybody watching this who doesn't love a good assessment, but I'd love to see where you fall on the scale.
This is kind of a fun one, but not super scientific, but biggest piece of advice is, I think, one that you would share, which is just be curious, right? Mm-hmm. Be a lifelong learner. Keep reading, read widely, have lots of different influences in your life. One thing that you can sort of see in the book as one of the subtexts is that, I don't believe there's just one way to sell. Mm-hmm. I think, if we have 5 million salespeople in the United States, we have 5 million unique ways of selling. And we need to encourage people more to find out what works best for them and how to become the best version of themselves. The way you do that is you expose yourself to a lot of different influences, read, listen to podcasts, listen to your bosses, talk to your customers. They'll tell you how to sell to them. Whatever you can do to just keep taking the information in, applying it to your selling.
Absolutely. Andy, I really cannot recommend this
Thank
book
you.
enough. Sell Without Selling Out. It's coming out tomorrow.
Yes.
If you're watching this later, this was reported on the 21st. This came out on the 22nd. Please go to andypaul.com, take the assessment, get a free chapter download, but you're really going to want to get the book. Again, what I love about it is that in essence, this is about selling in a way that is authentic to you, that feels good. So it makes it sustainable.
Yep.
But ironically, I don't feel like people know how to do that. And what you've done here is given them the step-to-step guide. If you don't like to sell or you're struggling with selling, read this book, because basically Andy lays out the strategy that you're going to understand. This is about caring about people. It's about having a conversation. It's about doing the right thing. And the rest is going to come to you.
Yep.
Yep.
Great summation. Thank you.
All right. Well, it was great having you. You have got to come back again. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. LaToya is so glad you're going to head over there and grab that book. We will wrap this up and put it in a episode you can listen to over and over again. Thank you again for joining us for another episode of Thrive. We'll see you right back here next Monday, 1:00 Eastern. And together, we're going to turn all of this uncertainty into a major competitive advantage.